Welcome to Time to Teach with Tammy, the podcast that gives tips, advice, and suggestions to teachers by a real teacher. So sit back and enjoy. And oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe. And we're back. Welcome to episode 67 of Time to Teach. Today's episode is called All About My New Math Stations. And yeah, that's exactly what this episode is going to be talking about. I used to do math centers within my math workshop. But the thing is that I have my particular group this year just consists of a lot of students with perhaps short attention spans. The dynamic is very different because of all of just the different personalities and things that are going on. So the dynamic is very different, and I was just finding that the format of my math workshop that I've used for years and years and years is not working for this particular group. And it could just be that maybe it's not working for this particular group at this particular time in the school year. As I record, I'm about to begin week 9 of the school year, so it's still fairly new. It could be that perhaps later in the school year, maybe my former ways of running math workshop would work. But just right now, it's not getting to the needs of my kids. So I've had to totally rethink and totally revamp, and I'm not really sure that this is not going to still yet revolve. I feel like there's always evolution. Everything I do is evolving in some way. They're usually small, subtle ways, but this has been a very dramatic and immediate evolution. So yeah, that is what I am going to talk about. So if you're interested in hearing about how I'm running my math workshop, which is purely in math stations, then stay tuned, because I have got you hooked up with today's episode. All right, so to begin, let me just explain the way I've been running my math workshop for years. Now last year I did add a new piece to it. So, like I said, a lot of times the things I do, it will change gradually over the years. But it's a very slow and gradual change, and it might just change in one or two areas. But the way that I was running it was to open up math workshop with a book. So my read aloud. That was a new piece that I added last year with the read aloud, because I'm really trying to integrate literacy into almost everything that we do. Really trying to integrate all subjects, because when you think about it, the world doesn't operate in isolated academic subjects. Like if I'm a lot of times, if I'm engaging in science, I might be engaging with a science book and I'm reading. So there's literacy, or maybe I'm writing about science. I feel I really don't do a lot of writing in science, but just as an example, everything is so very connected. And for some reason, we don't mimic the reality of our world in school, which is strange. But anyway, so that's why I've added that piece as of last year. So open up with a math read aloud. So it's a read aloud, but of course it has something to do with math. Somehow it's being tied in. Then we would go into our math journal, do 1 or 2 pages, everyone working from the math journal. And it was a nice time in my math workshop. I really like that, because that would give me time to pull students where I'm like, oh, hey, these kids are still working on their fluency, or which really develops over the years. So that's not typically something I pull for. But these kids are really still struggling with how to make 10 with any number. So I'm going to pull this handful of kids while everyone else is doing their math page. So I really loved that piece of my math workshop. And it also, in the math journal, students would be illustrating problems. So I really loved the flexibility and creativity piece that the math journal really, really promotes. Then from there, we would come back to the carpet. I would do my mini lesson, about 10-ish minutes. And then after that, we would either have like a partner activity, an individual activity, or sometimes just go into our math centers, which would be the last part of our math workshop, about 15-20 minutes. And it would be one center a day. So for example, we're at our math center portion of the math workshop. Group 1 would always start with center A on the first day of the math centers. Group 2 would do math center B. Group 3 would do center C. And then the next day math workshop, once we get to the last 20 minutes, 15-20 minutes of math centers, then group 1 now goes into center B. Group 2 is doing center C. Group 3 is doing center D. So I would just rotate down one a day, so that they would not actually be moving through the different centers every day, but doing one center a day at the end. And I liked that because then also the centers I would have set up so I can really see a lot of, I would try to observe my kids. I would do a lot of observing or helping students as I see like, oh, this student is struggling with this. Let me kind of differentiate. Let me give them some extra tools. And then also that could also be a time that I would pull students. So I loved the layout of my math workshop because there were 2 times in the workshop where I could really pull students if I needed to, and or observe and just kind of get more information on what my kids are doing, what they're doing well, maybe what they're still not understanding, and that could let me know who I'm going to work with the next day when kids are working their math journal. Who am I going to pull? Who needs extra reinforcement? Who needs something different? Whatever. So I really liked that. Now, this year I was really struggling. My kids have short attention spans. And I mean, like, I have so many of them concentrated in one classroom, maybe more than I've ever had at a single time. So it's super, super difficult to grab their attention for even just a few minutes. And my math workshop comes at the end of the day. So you can see how challenging that is. The last hour of my day is math workshop. My kids are exhausted. Their attention spans are already super short. And I just wasn't able to keep their attention the way I've been in the past. So I kind of thought about, okay, what am I going to do? And something that I already kind of have been toying around with since probably at least last school year, because I saw another teacher, well, I didn't actually see her do this, I just knew that she was doing this, was the idea that I could only teach in small groups, like take away the whole group mini lesson. So I tried that. And the first day I was like, okay, it was okay. I mean, everything is only okay or somewhat disastrous the first few times you do it, because that kind of comes with, trying new things. So I tried it day 1 and I'm like, okay, that's fine, except I lost the math journal piece, which is tough because that's when I was able to pull students. So I just felt like, I hated to lose that piece. So I'm like, okay, well, let me do this tomorrow, and then I'll actually open up with a math journal and then do my math stations. And I can't balance the math journal and the math stations because the time it takes me to explain the math journal page, I don't know, it's just not happening fast enough. So it feels like the math stations are super, super short, like super short. So I kind of reverted back and went back to just math stations, and that's what I'm doing now, is just math stations. There's no other component. So I'm going to tell you in a minute what that looks like, but I have to say I'm not 100% loving this, because it means that I'm in a station and I'm not able to pull students. And I have some ways that I might be able to work around that. So I do have some ideas as I'm still ironing this out. But so far, it feels good in the sense that students are only they're like 10-minute stations, and then a couple of minutes of that transition time, clean up, and then transition to your next station. So Tammy, what does math stations look like when you say that? Okay, so I have 4 groups. I started with 5 because I have 5 table groups, and I just saw that that was not enough time. So I took group 5 and I dispersed them amongst the other 4 table groups that exist. And yes, I have them by table group. So it's mixed ability, it's mixed language. Remember, I am in Mexico, so language is a factor. I always try to do table groups with mixed abilities. I always want a nice mix of highs and lows in everything: ability, academics, behavior, language, so all of those. And so I'm not grouping them based on their ability, which kind of increases the complexity of me trying to differentiate. It's like I'm going to have to differentiate within the groups, but I can't differentiate on my teaching points are still the same. And I did play around with, well, can I group them based on ability? But I just kind of looked at the one group who would be together would be super distracted kids who really need that modeled behavior of like, oh, this is what we're doing. They're the ones who rely on, you have those kids who really kind of rely on what are the other people around me doing so that I'm doing that. And I looked at the one very needy group cannot travel together. They would not function well together because they would all be lost. So that is not something I can do right now. I just cannot do that. So anyway, so they're just traveling around in stations based on their mixed ability groups. So this means that, I'm not differentiating by putting them in ability groups. I'm going to have to differentiate inside of the groups. So let's explore that in a minute. Let me just first finish explaining what math stations look like. So that's how I kind of disperse the 5th group. I spread them out within the other 4 table groups. And I have 4 stations. Station A is a read aloud station with my TA. So they just go to her and then she does a read aloud, and I do not have her on Tuesdays. So that just kind of means that on Tuesdays that station is not a read aloud. It's like maybe a station they did the week before. It's a familiar station that doesn't require a lot of explanation, and it's something they can do independently. So aside from Tuesdays, Station A is read aloud with my TA. Station B is Seesaw, a Seesaw station. Now, I've spoken about Seesaw in previous episodes. I even dedicated a whole episode on Seesaw. It's my new love. It's doing so many amazing things for me. It's also helping me to keep my sanity. I know that sounds horrible. And I know if you're someone out there who's into tech, I hear a lot of people say like technology should be more than consumption. But my kids are 5 and 6, and they have so much time to work with technology. So a lot of the ways I work with technology at this age, it is consumption, and I give no apologies for it. I'm kind of at that point in my life where I'm like, you know what? There's time for that, and it's building blocks little by little. Why are we rushing our kids to use so much technology at the super young years? Now, I'm not saying there can't be production at the technology level, but I'm just saying it's layer by layer and you have to build upon each other. So when they're in Seesaw, it's basically within the journals tab, because there is a journals tab that Seesaw allows teachers to leave work for students. So a lot of what I do is videos that go towards whatever our teaching points are. So this week we're focusing on sequence, and ordinal numbers and order of events. So there's videos that kind of speak to those teaching points and objectives. So when they are in the Seesaw, they get to go into the Seesaw tab. They can explore through all the videos I leave for them, and they kind of get choice of which ones do I want to explore. Maybe there are ones that I really liked and I'm going to revisit. So that's Station B. Station C is a carpet station, and that's something that may have something to do with our current teaching points, or it may just be something else. Like last week, Station C was a geoboard station where they were just exploring shapes. Really didn't have too much to do with current learning points, but I like to be able to spiral through and build on. So anyway, that's kind of what that is. This week, Station B, the carpet station, is actually going to be a game that we played in my station last week. So Station C is making 10, but it's a game called Spin to 10. So you spin, and whatever number you land on, you have to figure out how many more do you need to make 10, and I'm letting them use Rec and Recs. If you don't know what a Rec and Rec is, it's a fantastic math tool where you have 2 rows of beads. Each row has 10, and students can separate and put together numbers to really visualize 10, and then as the numbers become more complex, they can add on to 20. You can actually separate it out so they can first focus on 5, really whatever numbers you want, but you have a total of 20 beads. So in the game, they just kind of spin, and like, okay, you landed on 6. You can show 6 on your Rec and Rec. How many more do you need to make 10? So some of them are like counting out, well, how many more beads are there? Oh, there are 4 more beads. Oh, I need 4. So there's, I want to say a 5x5 chart with various numbers. It could be different than 5x5, but anyway, there's a chart on there, and whatever number they need to make 10. So I landed on 6. I need 4 more. I'm going to color in my 4. The first person who gets, I think, 5 in a row, I can't remember now, wins. So there's a little bit of competition in here. We played competing against our whole group because that was my station when you were with the teacher. That's what we did. Next week, as they do that Station C, it'll be, you get into partnerships and you're racing against your partner. Station D is my station. So I'm teaching different teaching points throughout the week. Now, when I talk to one of my colleagues, she does this year. She's done this every year. I think she came from the early childhood section, but she likes to add on complexities. So as they work through the stations and they do the stations the entire math workshop, at least with me. But they do each station a day. So the next day there might be an added layer to whatever the station is. Like, okay, now record your answer. Okay, now do this. So I really kind of like that, and that's what I've been trying to do with some of them. But it's not, some of them I just don't even change up. Like, I'm not thinking to change up the game this week, although I might. Last week, what Station C, the carpet station, I did change up. It was like the first day they played, okay, try to make squares. Your challenge is to make as many different squares. Think about big squares, little squares, squares within squares, squares coming off of squares, basically letting them be creative, not defining it too much. Just in general, I don't like to define things too much. We like to scaffold, yes, and there's a time and a place, but there's also some things that maybe after you scaffold, then you kind of leave things a little more open-ended, because otherwise I think students get in the habit of like, oh wait, well, how am I supposed to do it? And they can't even problem solve or think about outside of the box ways to do things if a teacher's not guiding them along the way. So I like to leave some things up to student choice. And then there was another day of like, okay, now you're going to make rectangles. How many different rectangles? Again, how many big ones, little ones? Rectangles off of rectangles, rectangles inside a rectangles. A rectangle without like creating a rectangle, and so like, can you create space in that, the space that you didn't make, can you make a rectangle? So without wording it that way, but just kind of, what different ways can you do it? And then another day was triangles, and then one day was a challenge of, something that was your own design using all kinds of different shapes. So there was kind of a progression of exactly how they were using the geo boards. So I don't know if I haven't really designed for this week. I said they're doing the spin to 10. I guess I could add some layers on there in terms of, okay, write the different combinations, but because of the way they're playing, it's a game and it's very fast and stations are about 10 minutes, that extra layer might be difficult, because when you're trying to compete and you're playing, you don't really have too much time to be recording. So I don't know, that one I probably won't. So things that I like about this new style, I like that it's fast and moving. That's what my kids need, especially at the end of the day when they are so tired and they're just like, oh, and I'm not even kidding. They sit on the floor and do that. Poor things. And I've actually tried to talk about how, like, yawns are contagious, and when your speaker is speaking, it feels offensive, but they're really not trying to be offensive. At that age, they're just super exhausted. So I like this because this activity gets them moving, and I think we just know, like, the more activity, the better. They get their blood pumping, they get the oxygen moving. And so I feel like this way of doing math workshop, it really speaks to who they are as learners. So it's, it's fast, it's moving, and they're not doing one thing for too long. So that's another thing I like. They're just in there, in and out, and then they're on to the next station. I also like that it's challenging me I'm pretty good about keeping mini lessons mini, because I'm even having to do this with everything, my reading workshop and writing workshop, which is already mini. But you guys, when I say I'm doing mini lessons, like, I'm timing myself. They're 5 or 6 minutes, and then I'm sitting my kids off. They cannot handle anything longer. So I'm really stretching myself and learning more about how to be super efficient with my lessons. Like, how do I do a quick connection? How do I go quick into my teaching point and demo? And how do I, like, quickly have them actively engage with them, and then they can go off and practice? It's really stretching me. So I like it. It's a challenge. I don't back away from a good challenge. I really do like challenges because I am so interested in growing. I think I've mentioned before, I'm an INFJ, if you're into the Myers-Briggs personality. So, like, we really are interested in learning and growing. That's something we're always trying to do, is grow ourselves. This is no different. I see this as an opportunity. So I feel super challenged and super exhausted, not just because of the math workshop, but this is the dynamic I'm working with my entire school day with this group. So I'm super exhausted, by the end of the day. I'm now that I'm entering into week 9, I'm kind of getting my footing, and I'm kind of feeling like I'm getting places, but I would be lying if I said I had this super figured out. I don't, and because of that, it's exhausting. Um, so yeah, so those are the things that I'm really liking about this new way of math workshop. Now, what are some negatives and things that I'm not saying it's negative, so I'm going to give up on it because of that, but what is not working totally that I still need to work on? And this is again why I really do my podcast, is because it's totally great reflection for me, and I hope that if it can help others, then great. But my podcast, probably more than anything, is for me. Maybe that's selfish, but it's also honest. It's thinking through and talking through things is very good for me. It's therapeutic. It's also just helps me to kind of iron out things that I really need to iron out. So I am not loving that I lost that piece of the journal, the whole group journal, because that's when I was able to pull, and I could pull ability groups, and I've lost that piece. I'm kind of sad about that. Also, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. A lot of times I would do a number talk, right, kind of depending how my math workshop looked like. If I knew that new teaching piece was going to be long and we had an exploration activity afterwards or an independent or whatever, I wouldn't always get to it, but I would have number talks included after my read aloud. And so now I don't have that built into my math workshop. And that's disappointing. Actually, I think those are the two main disappointing pieces. So I've lost the math talks, or at least time built in for the math talks. I have lost, being able to pull ability groups and just kind of feeling a little stuck. So I don't know, implications for me. Basically, I need to figure out how I can do the number talks, and I'm thinking maybe I just do a fast number talk within my teaching group. So before I even get into my teaching point, but it's still, sometimes it feels so rushed, but maybe I include it. It's the first thing I do, like a 2-minute number talk. I don't know. I got to figure this out. But I'm thinking maybe I can open up with that. And then the other thing is, again, I need to get better at differentiating within that group. So maybe thinking ahead, or who are those kids who I already kind of know who might struggle, and providing additional tools for them, maybe being able to explain it to them on the side. One teacher, the teacher from last year who used to only teach in small groups, as she saw someone really struggled, she'd keep them that station. Instead of letting them go on to their next station, they would stay like 2 stations with her. And that could be another way that I differentiate. And I really am going to try that this as I'm going through the new station. So I think there are ways to make it work, but I need to wrap my head around how to do that and remember that there are different ways of doing things than the way I've been doing it. So I'm thinking I'm going to just utilize that. So, and then also will imply that I need to have multiple sets of tools close to me. So lots of different kinds of manipulatives and things, because a lot of times, kids my age really need the manipulative. So I have that at any time, but sometimes I find that, hey, maybe the math cubes are not totally effective. Maybe doing it with the rec and rec, or maybe having my student do a visual, things like that. So I just need to have enough tools surrounding me that I can quickly incorporate and differentiate when I see that, hey, this kid is really struggling with this. And yeah, so I'm still playing around with it. I like it, but like I said, I'm still ironing out the wrinkles that exist. Yeah, so that's it, you guys. That's my new way of doing math stations this year. I'm excited, but also struggling. But I know that at the end of the day, as I go through the struggle, after this year, I'm going to be a better math teacher than I've been. So I don't let those things be barriers. I just know that, it's going to feel uncomfortable as I work through it. But once I get to the other side, I'm going to be so thankful. And I'm going to say, hey, look, look at what I can do now. Things that I've never been able to do as a math teacher before. And it's because I went through that struggle. So even though I'm relaying some frustration, I want you to know it's good frustration. I still know that I am going to do amazing things, but I would be lying if I told you that I'm not coming across some obstacles here, and if I weren't experiencing a certain level of frustration. Of course I am. But on the bright side, you guys, I'm still getting up every day excited to go to work. Like, I'm crazy that way. I'm going into my 10th year of teaching and I get excited to go to work. I don't know what that says about my personality. I'm strange, I know. I think this is what I feel like life should be for everyone. We should all be super excited to do what we do because that's really the true meaning. It's not just work. And obviously, I don't do this for the paycheck because, I'm a teacher. And hey, I'm a teacher in Mexico. I am making pesos, okay? So if you think you're not making that much in the States, try teaching in another country. Although I could say also there are many things that are a lot cheaper here in Mexico. So I think it's also very relative. And I feel that I live very well. But I also am not someone who tries to live beyond my means because I'm just not that person. But yeah, so yeah, we're doing good things and I will continue to keep you guys updated. Okay, you guys, that's it. So I think it is time for the wins and fails segment. Okay, so my win for the week is, we recently had a grade level meeting where we kind of previewed our report card and talked about the strands. And then our next step is to look a little more deeper. We are standard based, okay? So we don't give A's or B's, which we would never give in Mexico because we're not on that system. In Mexico, it is a numerical system. So a 10 would be an equivalent of an A. It's pretty much the same thing, except for, 100% would be an A or a 10. 90%, well, I guess that's still like an A, but an A minus, right? Would be a 9, 80% 8. So you kind of see how it's really the same thing. 80% B, it's an 8. But we don't do that at our school. We are standards based. So we report out on standards, and basically within those standards we have proficiency scales 1 to 4, 3 basically being that you're at mastery, 2 would be you're on your way to mastery, 1 not quite there, and not demonstrating mastery. That's not the way that it's worded. I'm not quoting here. And then 4 would be really demonstrating a deeper level, not to the next grade level, but you're going more deeply into the concept than what typically we would be looking for. So I love this, and so because we don't report out on all our standards, it's kind of like a continuum, right? So we're now on a trimester system. So if you've heard me talk about bimesters, we used to have 5 bimesters. Yeah, we've changed that. We're now on a 3 trimester system. So this is I have to get used to this. But in any case, we report out on some of those standards for the first trimester. So because I also have new teachers on my team, I'm kind of preparing everything for when we go into our meeting to really go more deeply into, well, what does that standard look like right now? Because as the trimesters progress, once we report out, we continue to report out on that standard, but that standard is going to look different within each trimester. So for example, within language and, well, it's writing really, conventions right now, you know, we're not really looking for much, right? We're looking for phonetic spelling. We're looking I mean, that's basically it. Even we're not, students won't even be using capitals or periods. But as the school year progresses, that standard is going to require more of them. So later, yes, we are going to look like, is there spacing? Are you correctly using capitals and periods? You know, so those standards progress, and we have to know, what does the standard look like right now? What is the expectation right now? So I'm trying to be super, super clear. So what I've done is I've taken all of our standards for math. I've started in math because this is quite a job, people. I've taken our standards for math that we're going to be reporting out on at the end of trimester 1, which actually ends November 9th. And 2018. You might be listening to this later. This could be old. But anyway, from right now, when I'm speaking, that's when it ends. And what I've done is I've set up a proficiency scale, because that's how we report out, of 1 to 4 for every single standard. And this is because even though we're reporting out like, oh, did they reach it? This is a 3. I wanted to be super, super clear. What is a 3? What is a 4? What is a 2? What is a 1? So yeah, so basically each standard I set 1 through 4 and actually typed up and identified what exactly that looks like. And I'll be going over this with the team because, you know, like I want to make sure, I just kind of wanted to get it started and then we'll go over it and then fine tune it. And especially if, like, say if someone says, hey, I don't really agree with that, then we can change the wording. But just to give you an example of what I mean, one of our standards that we report out on is compares numbers. So I think this really goes towards counting and cardinality. So within here, and I did this in Google Slides. So I start, the name of this slide is compares numbers. So that's our standard. And then evidence, what are we looking at? End of bimester assessment, observations, and in-class performance activities. Okay, so then I put in a table with basically 2 rows and 2 columns. So the first row we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then underneath it, so the column part is like the number, and then below would be the description of what that includes. So a 3, so again, this is mastery, means that a student can consistently identify quantities of more and fewer with few to no errors. So that's what we're looking at. Later, this standard, like by trimester 2, this actual standard, a 3, is going to mean that they can also identify how many more and how many fewer, but right now it's just saying I can recognize which quantity is more and which one is fewer. I may not be able to say how many more and how many fewer, but that's okay because that's what we're developing. So by trimester 2, that standard will increase. It means I can identify which quantity is more and fewer and how many more. 4, so a level 4 is like I'm going deeper within it, is a student can actually determine how many more and how many fewer right now. A 2, so I'm on my way, but I'm not quite there. A student inconsistently identifies quantities of more and fewer. The student might require some teacher support. So also by level 3, they're at mastery. They're demonstrating this without teacher support. So a lot of the lower, well, I don't want to say lower because that doesn't sound good, but it's like a progression really. But like if you're at a 1 or 2, which yeah, it would be less than 3, those are requiring teacher support. A 1 would be student rarely identifies quantities of more and fewer, and our student can only identify one or the other, but not both, and student, requires teacher support. So that's my win, you guys. I went through all of our math standards that we're reporting out on for trimester 1, and I set scales 1 to 4 and actually typed up descriptions. And then in a very soon, I think I have it set for this next week, meeting, we're going to actually go through that, make sure we're in agreement and make tweaks. I just wanted to get it started because this kind of stuff can be very time consuming. So that was my win. I'm super excited about that. My fail for the week, basically is that because I have like lots of special situations within my classroom, it's required a lot of attention and work on my part, which is totally fine. But I've just been feeling a little like I'm constantly trying to catch up with things because so much time and attention is being spent in these other particular things within my classroom. So like, for example, my inbox is completely full and spilling over. I simply do not have time to go through it right now. Like, I just do not have time to go through it. And plus also last week was like one of those weeks where on top of my regular recess duty, I had morning duty every single day. So that took a half an hour out of my day that I would normally have. Then I had a workshop, and I had one day where it was my grade levels turn to help prepare and set up for a staff meeting and then take it all down. So just like I'm just have been feeling a little like I'm playing catch up at every moment. And it doesn't, I mean, as a teacher, I feel like we're always feel like we can never get things done, but it's been, I'm saying this is beyond that level. It's like above and beyond what I normally feel. So I'm hoping that, okay, this week, now that I'm outside of, I don't have the morning duty, I don't have that Wednesday setting up for the staff meeting, I'm hopefully I'll be able to get a lot of things done or at least some things done. I'm not even going to say a lot. My goal is to get some things done that I haven't been able to get done. One of those things was recording. I haven't had a chance to record in a couple of weeks. So, hey, getting one of those things done, that feels good. So that's it, you guys. That is it. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. Also, I'd love to hear from you. If you have any ideas about how I can work within my math stations, if you maybe something you're using or something you heard that gave you an idea, I'd love to hear from you. Or if you just want to, like for anything, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me on Twitter. My handle is @TammyJ123. Yeah, that's probably the best place to reach me. And yeah, thank you again. Until next time.
Wait a minute. Wait 1 minute. Before you go, don't forget you can catch our show notes online at www.timetoteach.libsyn. That's libsyn.com. We're also on Facebook at Time to Teach. Don't forget to check out our Facebook group, Teachers for Effective Curriculum. And if you're an educator with your own podcast show, I invite you to join our brand new Facebook group, Teachers Who Podcast. Let's grow a community where we can network, problem solve, and discuss anything and everything podcast related. I'll see you there.